clothes and everything, if you reflected all over me, I'd have to take them to the cleaners, and I don't want to do that. So reflect with me, if you would, on the two people who are involved in an appeal, the other person and you. Now let's assume that you get up in the morning, you have a devotional time with the Lord, you read His Word, engage in prayer, ask God for grace to take on the day. You certainly wouldn't want to approach the day pretending or assuming that you think you can handle the day, because none of us has any idea what's going to happen during the course of the day. If you've seen some of these YouTube videos of someone walking up to a street corner and standing there right after they push the button, and then there's a car that comes through the intersection, gets T-boned by another car, and goes spinning around and gets within 6 inches of this guy as he's just standing there. What's he going to do about that? He can't do anything about that. It's just the grace and providence of God that he didn't get taken out. Amen? And so we don't know what kind of things are going to happen to us during the course of the day. We don't know how many emergencies we're going to face. We don't know whose counsel, who is going to seek our counsel. We don't know whether or not we have critical and crucial decisions that need to be made. And so before we ever take on the day, we ask God for mercy and grace and wisdom. Then during the course of the day, you might find that you are in a situation in which you are dealing with a person whose position in your life is unassailable. That is to say, they got a position in your life, or you could get all flustered, you could throw your chest out, you could strut around like a bantam rooster if you wanted to, but the reality is this person, man or woman, occupies an unassailable position in your life. One of the problems we have in our culture is that people have become so incredibly stupid that they don't recognize when another person has an unassailable position in your life. Let me give you an illustration of what an unassailable position is. I was 18 years of age. It was, I think, September the 20th, 1968. I was standing in front of General Robin Olds, and I was so terrified standing at attention in front of this general that I don't recall seeing him. I was locked up tight into a brace and looking straight ahead. And this is a guy who was a two-time college All-American football player. He became an ace fighter pilot in World War I on the very first sortie he flew. He didn't fly at all in Korea because his Hollywood actress wife arranged for someone to stall his career to keep him out of combat during the Korean War. And so some politician did that. When he found out about it, he had a conniption fit. Then he went to Thailand, one of the most innovative warriors that has ever lived, and his position in my life was unassailable. Now, could I legally have turned around and just said, forget you, man, I'm out of here? Could I have acted like a chump from Southern California? I could have. What could he have then done to me? Basically anything he wanted to. Physically, he was an imposing fellow, 6'3", about 250 pounds. Legally, he couldn't have touched me. He could have placed me under arrest because, being in uniform, I have to do what he says. So he really did occupy an unassailable position in my life, but many people don't recognize when somebody occupies an unassailable position in their life. I remember one guy, Vogelsong, I think was his last name, and he was being dressed down by a superior, and he lost it and spit in the guy's face. So there's a guy standing 6 inches from him, screaming bloody murder at him, ripping him up one side and down the other, and he forgot or was too stupid to recognize that the person standing in front of him occupied an unassailable position in his life. And so he reacted stupidly, he reacted foolishly by spitting in the guy's face. Okay, but in civilian life, what people would you possibly have an encounter with during the course of the day that you don't plan on having an encounter with during the course of the day? It's something that just happens that you did not plan, you did not predict. But once the encounter occurs, you find that in reality, the person that is dealing with you and you are dealing with occupies an absolutely unassailable position in your life. Can you think of someone? Come on, really? Do you occupy such a high and lofty position in our culture that nobody who faces you down and says words to you has any meaning to you, and you don't have to listen to anybody? You just in cocky fashion struck through life, paying attention to nobody? Really? Brian? A police officer. A guy who's wearing a uniform and has a badge, that's not quite good enough because it might be a fireman, okay? And except under special circumstances, you don't have any need to do what a fireman tells you to do, unless you're in a fire area. But you're walking down the street and a fireman starts giving you orders, you don't have to listen to the guy. Who's he? Who's he? He's got about as much authority as my grandmother, okay? But if the guy is a sworn officer, okay, and he starts telling you to do certain things, can I tell you something? You absolutely have to do those things, okay? Especially if he starts using magic words on you, okay? If he starts using words that communicate like interfering with the conduct of my job, well, he has just told you magic words that he has to be able to say to a judge is the reason why he then beat you down with a stick. He has to say magic words first. He can't just whip it out, extend it, and start whacking on you. He has to say magic words first. It has to do with things like performance of an officer's duty. When you hear phrases like that, then what should you do? Whatever he says. Whatever he says. Why? Because he occupies an unassailable position in your life. I would go even further. It's not just a guy who's wearing a badge and a uniform and is a sworn officer. I pretty much think that anybody who carries a 9mm pistol has an unassailable position of authority in my life. I will do almost anything that person tells me to do. Okay? You want me to grovel on the pavement? I will grovel on the pavement. You want me to lick asphalt? I will lick asphalt. You want me to eat gravel? I will eat gravel. And I will do it with a smile on my face and thanking you very much, sir, for the opportunity. Oh yeah, will I do all of those things? If a guy with a 9mm pistol starts ordering me to do that? Yes, because I am wise enough to recognize at that point, that person occupies an unassailable position in my life. What do you do when a person who occupies an unassailable position in your life tells you, you do whatever he tells you to do? So there are certain people that they have authority over you, and you're absolutely helpless. For all intents and purposes, there's nothing that you can say and nothing that you can do to make them do anything. And it's not just a police officer. It's not just a thug with a Glock. Who else might it be? Huh? I can't hear you. Yeah. I mean, you have a car that isn't paid off, and you have a house that you don't own free and clear, and you may have gone through the appropriate steps of getting married first before having kids, and you got a couple of kids in your house, and you want to raise them, and you want to feed them, and you want to clothe them, and your boss starts acting obnoxious to you, what do you do? Do you act like you're all high and mighty and I don't have to listen to that and nobody talks to me like that? Well, I'm gonna. You can do that if you want to. But unless you've got your options well thought out and well planned, that person occupies an unassailable position in your life. So you find yourself dealing with certain people that there's no equality there. Okay? Now, maybe equality in the eyes of the law, but the practical realities are there's no equality there. Okay? I'm driving a 2000 PT Cruiser, and he's driving a 2018 something. I don't know. I go to work at a building that he owns, working for a company that he started. He occupies an unassailable position. Okay, so your employer. Let's say you're going to make an appeal to your employer, right? Consider the situation that you find yourself in when you see the need to formulate an appeal to your, let's say, your immediate boss, because you can't go to the owner of the company. See, well, why not? Well, I'm not think about it for just a moment. You go to the foreman of the company. That makes the division manager mad at you. That makes the section manager mad at you. That makes the foreman mad at you. That makes your section leader mad at you. Why? Because you've just gone over them to the boss. You basically have turned up your nose to those four positions by going to the owner of the company. That's not a smart thing to do, okay? If you've ever served in the military and you've been like an E1 or an E2, you don't go to a master sergeant with a problem. You go to your company sergeant first, okay? And you certainly don't talk to an officer about a problem unless he is asking you a direct question. And even if he asks you a direct question, the non-commissioned officers who are nearby are going to be wondering, how hard are you trying to get out of answering his question so you can talk to your sergeant about it first? Okay? All right? So you find yourself, and you want to make an appeal to the person who is your immediate supervisor. Okay? This is the person that decides where in the schedule you fit and what tasks are assigned to you each day. I would like to recommend some considerations for you to reflect upon when contemplating your appeal that are related to your boss's situation as well as how long you have been employed there. Okay? Is your boss privately employed or publicly employed? That's really important. And depending upon whether your boss works for a private company or whether your boss works for the government, or let's say you work for someone who owns or works for a privately owned smaller company, or you work for someone who works for a government agency, or who works for a very large corporation. Because there's really no difference between a person that works for a branch of the government and a person who works for a very large company, okay? It's virtually indistinguishable when you're working for Shell Oil Company versus working for the Department of Interior. They're both huge bureaucracies. And the people that populate those upper echelons have very, very, very little freedom of action. The rule book for them is mostly what they're not allowed to do and say, rather than what they are allowed to do and say. You need to find out if your immediate supervisor is a bureaucrat, if he's a cog in the machinery of a very large organization, whether it's a private company or a government agency, or is your boss the owner of the company? If I worked for Justice Brothers, over here in Duarte on Huntington Drive. And I got hired by Ed Justice Sr. And Ed Justice Sr. told me, John, anytime you got a problem, you come and see me. Yeah, but you know, the foreman, I don't care what, forget the foreman. I want you to feel free to come to me anytime you want to talk to me. You got that, John? Wow, thanks, Ed. I really, really appreciate that. Now, whether you actually want to do that or not is another thing. But, okay, if I walk up to Ed Justice of Justice Brothers, does he have the power to address my problem regardless of what his HR people say? Yeah, he can do anything he wants. Why? He owns the company. It's named after him, okay? So he has a freedom of action that a guy who may have a lot more people working for him, but he is a functionary in a large bureaucracy, can't do. He can't do it. Because the guy who works in a bureaucracy is answerable to the next guy up the line, and the next guy up the line, and the next guy up the line. So these are things that you want to consider. The reason I bring your boss's situation up for your consideration is because the motivations of supervisors is not always the same. Varies greatly depending on the type of organization he works for, okay? Ed Justice Brothers, he has basically three things that he cares about. And I'm sure, you know, he's long since dead. But when I knew him, there's only three things that he cared about. Number one, first and foremost, he cared about making a lot of money. He wanted to make a lot of money, okay? So that he could buy those race cars that he has in the showroom there, okay? So that he could be one of the guys that helped found NASCAR. He's the guy that named NASCAR, okay? So that, you know, he and Parnelli Jones, you know, so he's got more money than Parnelli, even though Parnelli is more famous than he is, all right? So making money is a big deal to Ed Justice. Number two, the position of his family in the company is very important to him. And number three, his reputation as a man of integrity and honesty is very, very important to him, okay? So let's say Ed Justice has 50 people working for him here in the United States, and you go into a government guy, and he's got 150 people working for him. I promise you his motivation will be entirely different. Why? Well, because his primary concern will be protecting himself. Ed Justice's primary concern is not protecting himself, because what threats are there to his position in the company? None. He owns the company outright. Nobody can, what is somebody going to do, threaten to fire him? No, he'll laugh at him. You're going to threaten to sue him? He's going to laugh at you because he's got an attorney on retainer. He'll tie you up in court for 5 years without batting an eye, okay? So all of his motivations are different than the guy who works for the bureaucracy. And since your appeal should always seek the benefit of the organization and the boss as well as yourself, it's good to consider who your boss is, what his motivations are, because managers of large organizations frequently have, as I said, far less flexibility in decision-making than small business owners and managers who can basically do whatever they want to do, okay? What kind of an organization do you work for? Okay, Stephen, how many people work for the company you work for? How many? 9? Did you say 9 or 90? 9 at your location. Your immediate boss, does he own the company? Yes or no? Which is it? Either he does or he doesn't. He does? Okay. So, does he have to consult with anybody really if he decides he wants to fire you tomorrow? Okay, good. Okay. Brian, when you were a working man, the company that you worked for, how many people were there? Okay, 180 people. The guy that you worked for, okay, did he own the company? Was he the boss of the company? Was he in charge of that location? Did he have the authority to hire and fire you? Not really. Okay. So the way you deal with these two different bosses is entirely differently, is it not? Of course it is. Of course it is. Okay. Social dynamics issues in your workplace environment also deserves consideration. I remember one time when I was in college, I was taking a course, and the guy that wrote the book talked about one summer as a grad student, he was working in a factory where there was a bunch of punch press operators, okay? Really powerful machinery. You put your two hands on something and you step on something and something comes down under hydraulic pressure, and if your hands are not where they're supposed to be and your foot is not on the pedal, you could end up being seriously hurt. It was very, very boring work. And this guy was a grad student, and he was working in an area where there were 3 other guys that were running punch presses, and he was just a summer guy, and he was getting a master's in business administration, and he decided he would perform an experiment on these guys. Every day at lunchtime, when one of them would go to the washroom to wash his hands in preparation for lunch, one of the guys would go into his lunch pail, reach in and grab his fruit, either an orange or an apple. He would take it and he would hide it. The guy would come back, they would go to lunch, he would open up his lunch pail. Oh, my fruit, where's my fruit? Who's got my fruit? And they would do this little banter around, and he said every day it was the same scenario. Every day it was exactly the same routine. Until the day when no one was looking, he took the apple. So, the guy that normally stole the apple out of the lunch pail was offended because the lunch pail guy didn't have an apple for him to steal. He got miffed by that. So when the guy went to the washroom to wash his hands and came back, and he opened up the lunch pail and there was no apple, he didn't know that the young college student had pilfered the apple. He thought that the guy who took it every day had taken it every day. So he starts with the banter back and forth, only the guy that he banters with is already miffed at him because the apple that he usually would take wasn't there, and he's blaming the guy with the lunch pail for messing up their daily game. The daily interruption of dreadful boredom. And then, of course, the third guy was back and forth, and he said by the time he saw it spiraling out of control, he was absolutely scared to death to fess up that he was the one who had taken the apple. And he said it took almost 2 months for the 3 guys in the room to get over it, because they were so outraged. And what this young guy did was, it formed an entire chapter in the college textbook that he wrote about workplace dynamics. Well, let me tell you something. If comes the time where you're going to make an appeal, you have to consider the dynamics of the workplace environment if you're going to make an appeal to your boss. You have to know certain things. If you make an appeal, is there going to be blowback on you from your coworkers? If you ask your boss for something that they might have asked him for but never got around to, they might be offended at you for thinking to ask for something they could have asked for but never thought of. And they'd be mad at you for it. Will others where you work develop jealousy? When you ask your boss, make an appeal to your boss, and your boss considers and thinks about it and grants your appeal, you need to think about more than just whether or not you want your appeal met. You need to think about what kind of friction it's going to cause with everyone else in the workplace when you get what you asked for and they are overcome with jealousy over what they perceive to be special treatment. Will they misinterpret your appeal as an attempt to curry favor, thereby putting your boss in a tough spot? Are you making life hard for your boss by appealing to him in front of the other people? Or do you need to appeal to him in front of the other people about an appeal that hopefully he can consider and grant without anybody else knowing about it unless he wants them to know about it? My goodness, it can get very, very complicated. Isn't it interesting that when we go back in the book of Genesis, we read of no appeals being made by Joseph to Potiphar related to Potiphar's wife? Why did Joseph not make an appeal to the guy that owned him about the untoward advances he was receiving from the guy's wife? Joseph was in the right. Potiphar's wife was in the wrong. Potiphar knew about it, and we know that Potiphar knew about it because when it all came out, he didn't kill Joseph. Rather, he imprisoned him. Had he believed Joseph was in the wrong and his wife was in the right, he would have had Joseph summarily executed. But there's a difference between allowing a guy to discover bad things about his nasty wife. It's different than you trying to inform a guy that he's got a nasty wife. Okay? And you do not find Joseph trying to make an appeal to Potiphar. No, not at all. Some situations, you see, are just no-win. You look around, you get the lay of the land, you consider, you say, man, I'm being treated unjustly, I'm being treated unfairly, this is just not right, I don't like it. But as I look around, as I consider that guy and that guy and her and her and that guy and her, and then the boss and the dynamic and how long you've been there and what your personal reputation is, and you're standing with your boss and you're standing with other people, you think, I better just keep my mouth shut. I know how to make an appeal, but as I look around, if I make an appeal and my boss grants my appeal, I am going to make my own life far worse than it already is, so I should probably just shut up. That's some wisdom that a person who knows how to make an appeal needs to consider, along with other considerations that should be prayerfully reflected upon as you consider if you have attained the right standing to make an appeal, if you know the work situation well enough to recognize that you have the right basis for an appeal, and know when the right timing to voice the appeal exists, what the right information when conveying the appeal happens to be, if you're using the right words when articulating the appeal, and can anticipate having the right attitude regardless of the outcome. You should also consider your history with your employer. Are you a new worker who has no history with your new boss? Or have you worked there for a long time and making a biblical appeal would create whiplash in your boss because he is used to you getting drunk every day. He is used to you smoking weed out in the parking lot. He is used to you ogling the company secretary. He's used to you doing all of these things, but you've been a Christian for 2 whole weeks. It may be too soon for you to be making an appeal, because the fact that you're now a Christian probably hasn't sunk in really very deeply with the foreman. You understand what I'm saying? He thinks that a lying, scheming, conniving, fornicating, two-faced Judas is trying to act like Holy Joe and make an appeal. You may want to think twice about that. A new Christian overcoming a past pattern of conduct presents really a completely different set of problems than would be faced by a new employee who comes into the company as a believer. And so after the first interview, they're standing around in the break room, just outside the break room, and the foreman, after interviewing you for the first time, offers you a cigarette, and you say, yeah, I appreciate the offer, but no thanks. And when he invites you to go with him to Slaggart's Tavern after work for a couple of cold brewskis, you tell him, I appreciate the offer, but I don't drink. And then he says, are you one of those born-agains? And then you say, yeah, I am. I remember a guy that I used to work with who had been in the Navy for a number of years and who was a vault mechanic for Bank of America. Basically, his job was to break into vaults. He was a government certified vault breaker into her. And if they ever had a time lock go bad on a bank vault, they would call John Yeomans up, and John would come and break into the safe. He had every master key for every conceivable kind of lock you could imagine. He could get into any railroad car, Southern Pacific, Northern Pacific, the one that runs through Oregon, something Seattle and Spokane. He had them all. He had them all. And he went to church with his wife and got saved on one Sunday. And then his routine was every day after work, he would rendezvous with another Bank of America vault mechanic, and they would drink a couple of beers and smoke a couple of cigarettes. This is back in the day, you understand. And they'd talk over the day, and then they'd make their way home. And one day after he became a Christian, he told me about it because we used to work together. He was smoking on one of his cigarettes, and he was drinking a beer and telling that guy across the table that he needed to become a Christian. He needed to have his sins forgiven. He's pointing at him with his two fingers that are holding the cigarette. He said, "You need to," and the guy exploded on him. "Don't you sit there with a cigarette in your hand pointing at me, telling me I need to become a Christian." So what he was doing is he was making an appeal to the guy about considering the claims of Christ. And guess what? He didn't appreciate any of the dynamics involved and how quickly he could do something like that while still, he said, "I probably should stop doing this." And that's when he stopped smoking. That's also when he stopped drinking. These are things that you have to consider. Okay? A new Christian overcoming a past pattern of conduct presents a very complicated set of issues that have to be faced both by him and by the people that know him. Let's say you're not making an appeal. Let's say Christian Butler is not making an appeal to. It's a family business, right? Okay. So he's not going to do that. He's in a different situation. Let's say you're going to make an appeal to a government official. A government official. A government official is by definition a bureaucrat. Such a person is also someone who is not your boss. I'm talking about a government official that you don't work for. You may work for government, but you don't work for that guy in government, okay? You may work for the Department of Interior, and he works for the U.S. Forest Service. Maybe he works for the Department of Motor Vehicles. I know that's oxymoronic, work and Department of Motor Vehicles. I don't know, those two don't really go together. Maybe this person impedes the progress of other individuals for the Department of Motor Vehicles. Maybe this person slows down contractors at the city of Monrovia, and his job is to slow down contracts to make sure remodels take as long as possible to be done. Is that right? Is that the way it is, Norm, I think? Yeah, to make sure that if you have a hot water heater that goes out, you will not get the permit the same day so that you can take a hot bath that evening. It's not going to happen. Is that the way it works, Tom? I think no. Maybe you had good ones. I don't know. Or maybe you're just holding in reserve the fact that you may need a permit someday in the future, and so you don't want to commit yourself. Maybe this is a person who's a fireman, a fire marshal, or a police officer, or a building inspector. Maybe, nightmare. Maybe it's somebody who works for the Postal Service. Okay. This may also be someone who works for a very, very large company that has a very, very strict human resources guidelines in place for allowing supervisors to make decisions. And so this person is really handcuffed concerning what he or she is allowed to do with respect to almost every personnel decision that comes down the pike. And so you're talking to someone, how about this? You're talking to someone at an airline ticket counter. So basically, we're talking about you find yourself dealing with someone that you've never dealt with before, and it's unlikely that you will ever deal with this individual again, at least not voluntarily. One of the considerations when you're deciding whether or not you're going to make an appeal is that other person's workload. If you seek to make a biblical appeal, you need to ask yourself, am I appreciably increasing that person's workload? Am I by asking for something from this person, not only asking them something that they don't consider part of their job, but am I greatly increasing their workload? And as you increase that person's workload, is that person really in a position to respond to your appeal at all? Sometimes people who occupy those positions have zero authority to actually solve problems. Their job is to be a catcher's mitt, just to catch all of the flack that comes in from people. Can you reasonably help that person? Okay. And can that person reasonably help you, or is your appeal little more than introducing a vexing problem that the other person can't solve, you know? And that you're just going to vent, and that person's just going to absorb, and you'll be angry, and that person will hate you for the rest of your life. Since you likely have no history with this person you're facing, you have no track record to overcome and not much of a personal relationship to rely on when considering your appeal. It is unlikely that your appeal can help the person behind the counter, but sometimes appeals are possible. Let me tell you a story. It's a story that shows me in a good light, which is the reason I want to tell the story. Another guy and I spent the night at a motel over in Inglewood. See, well, why would you want to do that? To be close to LAX for a very, very early flight the next morning, and being a very nice husband, I didn't want to disturb my wife. This guy also didn't want to disturb his wife. Why get these women up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and they have to drive for an hour to drop you off at the airport for like a 6:30 flight, and then they get to drive back home right in the midst of the morning traffic. So we decided, we just met at the hotel and rented a room and spent the night there. However, the other guy, he woke up late. So we arrived for a check-in about a minute too late. Maybe 120 seconds too late, but we were too late. So we walk up to the counter in an attempt to check our luggage, and the woman at the ticket counter informed us that, I'm sorry, it's too late. And of course, the guy that I'm with has to make some really snarky punk remark that insulted her, and there's nothing she can do about it. There's nothing she can do about it. It's not up to her. But he just has to crab and complain, and I'm just gonna go home. So I turned to him, and I told him to knock it off. And I did not say knock it off in a very nice way. I let him know, knock it off. And I turned back to the lady, and I said to her, and I kind of turned, I'm really sure that you can find seats on later flights for the two of us, because I'm sure you know how to work that system, and you know the ins and the outs, and so I would not be at all surprised if you were able to find maybe flights coming up pretty soon that we could get to where we need to be. And would you please do that for me? So she starts going away, and she says, well, I have a flight for you leaving in an hour, but not for him. Well, at that point, my traveling companion said something else stupid. Of course. And I looked at him, and this is what I said to him. I remember, because I think it's a rule that everyone should live by. Never insult a waitress before she serves your food. Am I right, Ruby? Not that you would ever do anything, not that my mother would ever have done anything, but some people, you never insult a waitress before she serves your food. That's just stupid. That's stuff that you shouldn't have to teach people. And people that don't know that need to be hit with a stick, okay? So I turned back to her and I said, you know, the second leg of our flight at O'Hare doesn't leave until 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And I'm wondering if you could please find my traveling companion. I didn't want to call him my friend, because he had burned himself with her twice already. My goodness. Can you please find him a later flight so that we can at least travel the final leg of our trip together, so that the person who's picking us up, who's just really the nicest guy, so it'll be as easy as possible for him to collect both of us. Despite the stupidity of my traveling companion for making dumb remarks, I was able to compliment her twice and help her to feel competent about her skills, to not only help me. I didn't even try to persuade her to help him. That was a waste of time. I tried to get her to help the person unknown to her who was going to be picking us up later. See? I just assumed that her default position for strangers was to be nice to them, because this idiot, he had already ruined it, okay? So it was actually 2 different appeals that she responded to. Could I make her day better? Not really, except maybe a sense of accomplishment, giving her a compliment on her ability to handle a very complex computer system that sometimes caused people problems, and she handled it masterfully. So thank the good Lord. That's an illustration of how you may find an appeal to someone that you may not. How in the world am I going to make an appeal to this person? And it turned out that it worked. Any of you ever have occasion to make an appeal to someone? Can you give us just the Reader's Digest version of how it went? Anybody? Going? Patty? Can you talk louder, hon, so we can hear you? Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Now, no one would think that Marisa was ever small and undernourished now because she's such a tall gal. Yeah. Anybody else have a situation that God gave you maybe some instant wisdom to get through with an appeal that you didn't? Brian.
I'm supposed to be increasing on my medication every week. So I, with the advice of the nurse that came to the house, he told me that I should ask the doctor about remaining on the current dose of that when I leave during vacation to decrease or forego any further side effects. And I told my doctor, and she said, yeah, that's perfect.
Good. Excellent. Excellent. Anyone else? If you think you're going to be able to get through life without developing some skill at making appeals, boy, you want to live a more difficult life than I choose to live. Because this is what greases the skids in a lot of areas of life, just being able to make an appeal to someone, and a bureaucrat. Because boy, I tell you what, if a self-important bureaucrat decides that he wants to shut the machinery down, or she decides she wants everything to grind to a halt and leave you helpless, oh my soul. They can, if they want to, make life very, the guy that was with me, had I not been there, he wouldn't have flown that day, you know, because he was dumb as a stump, okay? You have to be aware of the situation and willing to defer. That woman, though she was not a very tall gal and she was on the other side of the counter, she occupied an unassailable position in our life. Okay? We couldn't make her do anything. We were entirely at her mercy, and Nitwit didn't recognize that. He thought that he could bulldoze her the way he tries to bulldoze his way through life, and with some people, that doesn't work. All she would have to do is say, security, you know, and it would be all over but the shout. All right? Anybody else have a question? Next week, Lord willing, I'm going to show you just a couple of other applications of how to make an appeal that I think will be helpful to you. At least I hope it will. If you would, please hand your attendance slip to the nearest aisle, and have some very nice fellows coming to pick them up from you. I want to mention a couple of announcements.